Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Uncomfortable Conversation podcast. This season, we are talking to people that have a range of perspectives on the conversations that do or do not prevent and respond to sexual assault and violence. And so today I am here with Edie and excited to dive into a couple of different areas with Edie. We are planning to talk about high school,
Yes.
perhaps with a side of religion and also workplaces, and we might, if we have time, get into the gaming world as well.
Yes, for
So,
sure.
so good. Well, thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
Well, good. Well, let's dive in and see how uncomfortable we can get
Oh,
by
that's
obviously starting to talk about high school,
sure.
a very uncomfortable time for many of us. And I know I grew up in New Jersey and I
Mhm.
went to a big public high school with lots, is very racially and culturally and socioeconomically diverse. And so
Mhm.
there's sort of lots of things that I learned about myself and the world while I was in high school. And tell me a little bit about your high school
Yeah. So
experience.
my experience was very different. I went to an all boys Irish Catholic high school. That was probably one of the least diverse high schools that one could imagine. Fairly small. Our graduating class, I think, was around 130
Okay.
students. It was a Jesuit education. So, a lot of faith based classes that we were required to take. And as a queer individual, it was a little difficult in that way. I was very closeted at the time,
Hmm.
and trying to explore myself and my own identities within the framework of a Catholic education and a Catholic ideology was a really tough time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And you had mentioned that you went to high school sort of during a Jesuit high school at the
Mhm.
time when the sexual abuse crisis in the Catholic Church was coming into focus.
Yes,
And
so it was
so,
actually mostly just after that.
okay.
So most of the sort of the Boston spotlight, from the Boston Globe, that sort of uncovered the child sex abuse scandal in the Catholic Church had happened just before I entered the school. And it was one of those things that was just never addressed by the school directly. It was underlying everything. And being so heavily involved in the Catholic Church at the time, Cardinal Sean O'Malley was doing what's called a novena, and was going from church to church, essentially on an apology tour for the
Okay.
Catholic Church, prostrating himself before the altar, and so it was one of these things that happened outside the school and was addressed outside the school. So everyone knew it had happened. Everyone knew that the school was directly involved in it. And yet it was never once, I can't remember a single instance where it was talked
Interesting.
about at the school.
I know that at least I'm a mom to a 11-year-old and a
Mhm.
14-year-old. And so I think my observation and also memory is that we did believe we were grown when we were starting high
Of
school.
course, yeah, you feel like a full person at
Yes,
that point.
yes, but in reality, we were maybe 14,
Mhm,
13, 14, 15 years old, and so I'm curious at that time, particularly the spotlight was a Boston Globe exposé about child sexual abuse
mhm,
in the Catholic Church and the degree to which the church had covered it up, had moved people who were known perpetrators from place to place, allowed them to continue to find new ways of hurting people,
mhm.
and that there was a reconciliation of what that meant in Catholicism at the time. But
It
I'm curious, what how did you think about those issues, or what conversations had you had about specifically about child sexual abuse, or was it really limited to things that you had read? So sort of like what did you know? Like, you're a 14-year-old,
yeah.
who had talked to you about what when you were 14?
No one had really talked to me
Okay.
about it at all. It was very much limited to what I had read or to, even in the church when it was sort of mass and Cardinal Sean came and did that novena, it was an
Was that at your
apology. That
church?
was at my
So
church,
what
yeah.
what did he say?
Well, it was sort of an apology, an acknowledgement that something had happened, but again, never really getting into the details, never talking about how much the organization that is the Catholic Church had moved people around, had created this environment that allowed for more abuse.
Mhm.
Um, so it was my own understanding of it was that something bad had happened, and I needed to be a little bit leery of being alone with priests. That was really like
Right. Right.
the extent of it.
Yep.
And so, within our high school, there were multiple problems when you have all boys at a young age that have this in the background and isn't addressed. It created an environment, again, for more abuse and for misbehavior, both among the student body and among the
Right.
faculty.
So in high school, so I'm just going back to prior to that experience, had you had close relationships with priests that
Yes.
you then are wondering, gosh, is there something that I should be worried about in this?
For sure, it was a thing in the back of my head. I will say my family had, a priest who we were very close with, who was a member of our local parish, and, Father Brian Smith was a true role model for me,
Mhm,
a really
mhm,
wonderful man, who was an advisor much all the way through my high school experience and into college. Unfortunately, he passed away young,
mhm.
um, but, there was always that inkling in the back of the head of, like, "Do I have to be worried about Father Brian?"
Right,
And I didn't. I will say I wanna
right,
be very clear on that, that he was truly a wonderful man and a man that I miss very, very much, um, but it did color my relationships with folks that were intended to be role models and advisors for me.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that resonates very much, I think, with my own experience as a survivor and also what I've heard from other survivors, where one of the things that gets broken is your ability to trust somebody or to know whether or not to trust yourself in whether or not you can trust somebody. And
Mhm.
so that I can imagine that those ripple effects through a community like the Catholic Church, just it's like trust was broken.
Mhm. Mm.
And what does it look like when trust is broken? Is it looks like you have these little sort of thoughts in your head that you have to say, is that real? Is that not real? Is
Right.
Am I imagining this? Should I be worried? Should I not be worried? And particularly it sounds like when you don't have a place to go sort that out in
Mhm.
conversation, or you're not having a conversation about what healthy relationships look like. One of the other folks that we're talking to this season is actually does training at secondary schools
Mhm.
around how to create environments that are safe. And so some of
Right.
the things that we talked about were being able to have hard conversations. And
Mhm.
so I'm curious if there so you're saying that there was no at your high school, did you receive any training or conversations or classroom time on anything related to what it's like to be a survivor, what it's like to support people, healthy
Mm.
relationships, bystander intervention? You're like, nope,
Not at
not a
all,
single.
no. I mean, I think even just sex education in general
Yep.
didn't begin until I think our sophomore health class, and it was like a
Mm.
2-week, piece of the overall health class. I remember there being a full school assembly, where one of the priests from the campus ministry department, did a talk about abstinence,
Mhm.
and abstinence being the way to protect yourself, and that was the
From what?
only from anything,
Okay.
from sexually transmitted diseases, from sexual
Sin.
abuse, from sin. It's
Yes.
just yeah, it was just
Yep.
just don't do it. Don't engage in sexuality whatsoever. And so there was this real culture of repressing conversation about sex and about
Mhm.
sexuality, that again, that idea of building trust, I
Yep.
think, is so important. So we couldn't have hard conversations,
Right.
which meant that when there were incidents that otherwise could have been stopped or prevented
Yeah.
by talking to a trusted advisor, that trusted
That
advisor didn't exist. And so there were problems throughout my time in high
Yep.
school that elevated to a point of whether it's criminal charges
Yep.
or a teacher being fired, or and
Yep.
there was always this like rumor mill among the students of what had happened. I still don't know in some cases whether those stories are true or whether it is just like that's what we assumed was happening in the absence of conversation.
Right. And so Can you give me an example of what if you feel comfortable?
Sure. There was a teacher, I believe he was in the religion department and was teaching ethics courses, who was having some inappropriate conversations with a student, one of my
Mhm.
classmates, as well as students from our sister school.
Okay.
So all boys schools typically partner
With
with an
the
all girls
all-girls school,
school,
right.
and that's how you do your semi formal dances and things like that. And in particular, a lot of those students from our sister school were involved in our theater program. Um, and so the rumor is that he engaged in a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl from our sister school, and was fired for that. And that rumor mill built because of the few students within our school who had this sort of inappropriate text-based relationship with this teacher, who said, like, yeah, he was kind of a little creepy, so I assume that this is what happened. Um, Whereas, like, if there had been someone who was truly trusted and open that we could have talked to, those students having that relationship could have said, like, "Hey, is this normal? Is
Right,
this is this way of interacting with a teacher a thing that is acceptable and common for folks our
right.
age?" And I think that conversation never
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny though, so one of the things that is a standard policy for sexual violence prevention in schools is specifically around one-on-one interactions. I actually
mhm,
just completed my son as a scout, and the scouts also had a fairly significant reckoning
mhm,
with with
mhm,
child sexual abuse, and so I think if you are creating environments where adults and children can be alone together, that significantly increases the level of
right.
risk, particularly if it's overnight. And that's the case in scouts. I think that sounds like there was many potentials for that
Mm,
around some of the work of the church and some of the work, that can happen in schools as well. But the training really talked about the importance of just the policy is no one-on-one
right.
interaction, either on social media, text, or in person,
Mhm,
that there needs to be either another adult or another student
right,
in the mix. And so the reason you set that policy is not because any adult who texts a child one on one is sexually perpetrating
right.
against them, but it's that if you know that there is a policy and I'm pushing boundaries on that policy, then I may be more likely to push boundaries on a physical relationship in a way
Right.
that's inappropriate. And
One of
so
the interesting things about the way organizations and schools, I think, address this is that yes, there is often that policy in place, but it's often talked about from the perspective that we're actually protecting the staff.
right.
Because any student in a one-on-one situation can accuse a staff member, whether it's
Yeah.
true or
Yeah.
not. And I feel like that is just a little bit of a disingenuous way to approach it,
Right.
because it's
It's protecting the
so
community. It's
right.
protecting the
It's protecting the community,
community.
and it's also so rare that the student is going to be the inappropriate one in that
Right.
situation,
Right.
right? And I do think a lot in my current role, I'm the senior director of finance and operations for College for Social Innovation, a college education
Yep.
program, working very closely with students, and some of the policies and things we have put in place to allow ourselves to support students and become trusted advisors for
Yep.
students without creating that inappropriate boundary. That one of the biggest things is, like, don't give your personal number to students. Use our Google Voice numbers,
Mm.
which can be recorded and can be reviewed if necessary. We have a student support group, a team that is particularly looking at and trying to find students that seem like they are struggling and need extra support, or where you see those early warning signs that
Right.
something is wrong,
Right.
and to reach out to them and provide even just an ear or
Right.
somebody to listen to. It's I think that's such an important piece of building trust, and that trust is like the key piece of all of this.
Right. I mean, if you look back on your experience as a high school student, are there conversations you wish a trusted adult would have had with you? So I think what you're talking about to some extent is, and we can talk about it more, is the institutional training and policies
Mhm.
and systems, which I think is one part of it. But I'm curious if you have if you could wave a magic wand and imagine yourself as a freshman, is like,
Yeah.
someone that you really loved and cared about sat you down and said, Edie, I want to have a hard conversation with you about
Mhm.
X? Like,
Yeah.
what would you have imagined that to be?
Well, I think in that particular instance, somebody sitting down and acknowledging the abuse scandal
Mhm.
and acknowledging that there had been a priest at the school
Right,
had been transferred
right.
for this very reason.
What would that have sounded like?
Um,
Like,
uh,
when you say acknowledgement, like, what does that sound like?
Literally just saying it, saying this happened. This happened, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to be looking for signs of it in case something like that begins to happen again.
So it would sound something like, "Edie, before you start your freshman year,
Mm,
I know that there's been a lot of news articles that you've been consuming about
mhm,
child sexual abuse in the church setting, and you're going to a Catholic school now, and there
right,
will be priests there. And so I wanna have a conversation with you about what is safe or not safe, because I don't
mhm,
want you to go and be scared of priests.
right,
I do want you to go and have healthy and safe relationships, and here are some of the
mhm.
characteristics of those relationships, and an adult should never wanna be alone with you."
Yes, setting the norms,
Right,
right? Like,
yes.
explaining what
Yeah.
is typical, what is acceptable, what is a warning sign that things are going too
Right,
far. Um, I think that would have been key in the very beginning.
right.
Yeah.
And I think when hopefully this type of conversation helps to give
Mhm.
there's I'm a parent of a 14-year-old, is
Right.
that these types of scenarios and scandals have not actually gone away, and so
Mhm.
being able to provide folks with the tools that they need to have those conversations. Is there any other I think acknowledgement, it sounds like,
Mhm.
was one of them. When you think about some of your peer groups, and you had mentioned that there were some other incidents that happened, kind of what are the other both institutional group conversations that you think would have been helpful, or individual conversations? Is there anything
Um,
else that comes to
I
mind?
think, there's 2 sides. One, I wish there had been more from the institution of creating some group conversation and addressing sexuality as a thing that is human and not as a thing that should be squashed and hidden and put in behind doors. Because I think when you have that overall culture of isolating sexuality, you create a
Right,
breeding ground for that to be abused because you don't ever learn what is normal or
right.
what is or um, safe sexuality
Mhm.
as opposed to what is unsafe sexuality. So it is all a thing to be
Right,
hidden.
right. And you do think that that would be something that you would want to learn in school, or in
I
a
think
faith-based
so.
setting,
I think
or
in
in
school in
school? Yeah.
particular, I
And
think
because your school combined a faith-based setting
yeah,
with what would be a traditional high
yes.
school setting, and
But
so
I think that type of conversation
yeah.
is uncomfortable,
Yeah.
and there are very few places that are safe to have those uncomfortable conversations, and I think school has to be one of those.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, because otherwise you go to the internet, and
right.
that's not as
Right, right. The flip side of this, I will say, is that, and one of the what I think was the strengths of my high school education, was that there were real bonds of friendship made among the student body, and I still, 20 years later, my best friends are friends that I met at PC High. Um, and so I think that we had a really strong support group among ourselves. That
Mhm.
when something was weird, we started to talk about it among ourselves, and we a little bit of we protect our own type thing of like somebody mentions, oh, this teacher or this contractor or something is making me feel uncomfortable. We make sure they're not alone together. We make sure that we're putting ourselves in between that person and that instructor
I
yeah.
yeah, I ran with a group of really tough female many of them were also survivors,
Mm,
and we took nothing from nobody.
right.
We were in New Jersey. But there was I'll tell you two quick stories. So one was I had a friend, and it was our sophomore year, and we were reading Catcher in the Rye, and there was a sort of uncomfortable scene between a student and a teacher
Mhm.
in the book. And we felt like that was an important teachable moment that our 10th grade English teacher did not take advantage of.
Glossed over, yeah.
And so we wrote a lesson plan, and we brought it to class, and we took the class over, and we delivered on the lesson plan, which did include
That's incredible.
which included what consent was. I mean, I think back to some of those stories. I mean, they were very glad to see me graduate, But, there was another one, there was a security guard who would make comments
Mhm,
about girls' bodies, and
mhm.
I actually just recently was going through scrapbooks that my mother had kept of things that I did in high school,
Mhm.
including the letter I wrote to the assistant principal of holding, I was like, I documented. I mean, I don't know where I learned how to do that, but I documented everything from an HR with a very HR lens
Yeah.
as a
Write it all down.
as a teenager. I was like, I came with receipts.
Yep. Yeah.
So,
And I think it's a scary thing that we have to do that, but you do. That
right.
is, yeah. I mean, working in the HR realm myself, that's the first thing I tell
No,
everyone is write it
for
down.
sure.
Write it down,
Yes.
date it.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about kind of what that HR realm looks like.
Mhm,
I have done skills-based training on sexual harassment,
mhm,
violence and prevention, sexual violence prevention and response. And that was so it's not with the legal compliance lens, but it's essentially if you have a gap between your policy and your practice.
mhm.
So the way that I would describe it is that the policies kind of give you the rules of the game, but if you don't have practice, then you just throw a bunch of people on the field. You can't expect them to be a winning team.
Right,
And
right.
so what are those skills? And one of those skills is being able to have uncomfortable conversations
Mhm,
about things like, could be workplace dating, it could be understanding what an HR investigation looks like, or sort of how
mhm.
you set like the role of HR is to create the maximal set of safety and legalities for a particular organization, not to be one person's individual advocate. So it's like if you're looking for an advocate, like don't, like
Right.
HR might help, but they might not.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's always that, conversation out in the working world of HR is actually not your friend. HR is there to protect the organization, and
Yeah,
and that is very much true.
right.
Um,
And they can provide
and
and they can provide supports and services
exactly.
and, prevention and engagement. It's like
Right,
all of that. And so
right.
how do you have the balance of those 2?
Yeah, I think, for us, because we're an education-based program, a lot of our protections and policies come through Title IX,
Mm.
and through our sort of AmeriCorps terms and
Mhm.
conditions. But we also have a grievance policy of our own, and I think the big thing that we try to make sure is that we are training folks on that so that they know what the process looks like.
Yeah,
And we talk through, what happens from point of report to point of resolution.
right.
And
And you do that before
we do
some
that before something happens. That's like part of our onboarding, part of our initial training, part of our launch week programming for our students. We talk through what this process looks like. We set time limits on response. So if you
Mhm.
report something, we're going to respond to it within 48 hours, that sort of thing. We explain that an investigation may require us to talk to other people involved, or in the
It's
scenario that we're going to have to collect
yeah,
some of that information. And then the thing that I always make sure we highlight really strongly is the no retaliation clause. That if you report something, it is in no way going to impact your employment with us, your participation in our program, anything like that, because we need people to feel comfortable to come forward, even if the result of the investigation isn't what the result that they want. They need to know that it's not going to poorly impact them, adversely impact them. And so we make sure that protection is clear.
I think that that narrative in advance of a lot of what would happen to me is I would be pulled in to do a training typically in the wake of something
Mhm,
negative that had happened. Nobody had bothered to sit down and explain what you're talking about. So then you've got a rupture in
mhm,
trust. And you can't talk about the details of what may have happened with a particular incident. No one's really ever going to have all of the details,
right.
but the people that do typically aren't at liberty to tell the whole story. And so therefore telling that story in advance,
Mhm,
here's how it works. And you might report something and we have to assess whether it's a pattern of behavior.
right.
And so this particular incident might not be leading to somebody's termination, but you can guarantee it that if a second one gets reported, that
Yeah,
the person is going to be gone.
that's another piece of it too, though, is talking about what the consequences
Mhm.
are, and talking about particular scenarios, using case studies of this
Always
is what
case
it could look
studies.
like, and this is what the sort of disciplinary action might look like.
Mhm.
Because one of the things I find particularly with students is that they're often afraid to report, or they will tell you something is happening, and then they will say, "But I don't want anything to be done about it," because they're worried.
Yes.
Oftentimes they're like, "I don't want this person to be removed from the program. I just want them to stop doing this."
Mm.
And so there's a fear that by reporting, they are going to completely ruin this other person's situation. And so which is, I
It
think
doesn't
that
it robs that other person the opportunity for feedback
for
on their
feedback to
behavior,
learn
to
and
learn, to
grow.
grow.
Right,
Yes.
right.
Yes. Yes. No, can you I'm really curious. I used, case studies and examples to sort of illustrate how the process I'm curious if you have kind of is there an example or a case study that you are using that's getting some good traction for you right
One
now?
of the ones that I use fairly frequently is actually from my own work experience, where I was in an HR role and I received a report from one of our junior staff members that a more senior staff member had sort of been um, romantically approaching her and had sort of cornered her in her office in a way that was like she had no escape from the room, and was sort of assuming that it was a consensual thing
Yep.
when it was very clearly not.
Yep.
And so we talk through this whole story, and we talk about how I received the report, which was a verbal conversation in
Right.
my office, how that turned into an investigation where we did talk to a few other coworkers and asked like, hey, have you seen anything around the office? We sort of asked some questions that were didn't name names, but were intended to gather information, and we did end up getting more reports of like, "Well, I've noticed these 2 that there's something weird going on here." And so we did establish that pattern of behavior. We then, reached out to the perpetrator here and talked with him and asked his side of the story, got his perspective, and in conclusion, looking at all of it, we found that there was a pattern of behavior. There was, a clear instructions to stop and to back off that were
Mhm.
ignored, and that person was dismissed.
Yep.
That when you find that pattern of behavior and you say, "This is unacceptable," and so, that is one that I think, like, using real examples is important, because when you're just sort of using conjecture and, imaginary scenarios, it that comes across as being not real. You people can tell when you're telling a story that's
That's
fake.
fake, right, but I mean, but an alternative conclusion to that could have been that you did the investigation, it seemed like it was a sort of one-time weird interaction,
Mhm.
and, sort of on further discussion,
Right.
there, is
And in that situation, like, we would require some sort of additional training of
yeah,
what does
right,
workplace sexual harassment look like, and, to make sure that that person is learning and growing. And then there's a monitoring period of like, we're keeping an extra eye to make sure that you have learned this training, that you are growing, and that this is not something that's going
yeah,
to repeat.
right, it's like one of the examples that it dials it back a little bit, so I think that what you had on there with in your story, it's the cornering somebody and not physically
Right.
not being in their way,
Yeah.
that is that line crossing.
Hmm.
I would play with one that was a little dialed back one from that, so it was I asked you out for drinks, and and the person says no, and then I ask again,
Right.
and one person experiences that as I'm being asked out on a date, and the other one is just like, well, it's like you could go talk to me, but like, oh, I had a
Right.
group thing that I was inviting this person to,
Mhm.
and they didn't say no, they said I was busy,
Yes.
and so
Yes. Yeah, and I think that highlights a good point that I think, like, particularly in the workplace, context is so important.
context is
Just, like, give as like, over communicate. Give
yes,
as much context as you can when you're asking someone out for
right,
drinks
yep,
so that you don't have those
right,
misunderstandings.
yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the like there's a spectrum of behavior, a spectrum of context, and a spectrum of consequences
Mhm.
and accountability, right? And so I think it's thinking, and the higher you are in the organization, the more accountability that you should have for yourself
Right.
and your behavior, and the more you need to be aware of how you show up and how you're wearing the power of the role, not just of
Absolutely.
your identity or your age or your
Mhm.
And so I think that's something my day job career pathway has been in the fundraising and development. And so we are typically the part of the organization that's closest to the executive
Right.
and closest to the money.
Mhm.
And so I've always had to coach my team that you are, no matter what your role is, more
Mhm.
powerful than other people in the
Absolutely.
organization because of the team that you sit on. And so
Such an important point to get across. I particularly I think of that from the sort of managing up perspective. I see this a lot when you work in organizations that have diverse age ranges. My current organization, we have staff members that are in the 22 to 25 range, that and those who are in the 60 to 65 range, and vast different hierarchy positions from our executive all the way down to our managers, which is our sort of lower level staff. Um, and even on just simple work-based tasks, things that come from an executive that the executive thinks is like a suggestion or like an idea, hey, maybe you want to explore this, from younger staff members who are just entering the organization, that feels like a directive.
right.
That feels like I have to do this because the executive said it. And that power dynamic, when you bring that into the realm of social interaction,
Mhm.
can feel like harassment.
Right.
Because there is this understanding that the executive is the one who tells you what to do.
Right. Right. No, well, and I think that's exactly right. Is your one of the skills that is important to develop, which you can only
Mm,
develop through uncomfortable
right.
conversations, is talking about power and what
Mhm.
power means and how if everyone has some sort of traumatic history with power,
Mhm.
it could look really different. Certainly, sexual violence is one type of traumatic
Right.
history with
Right.
power, but it's not the only one. Racism is another one. There's, like, lots of ways that people
Mhm.
experience, sort of trauma and
Which
impact on power.
brings that back to my feelings in a Catholic education and in a church setting with a priest. This is somebody who you are intended to have conversations about truly the deepest
Getting
parts of
into
you,
heaven.
getting into heaven, the state of your soul,
Right.
and this is a person who has the authority of God,
Right.
and so there is very much this like. When can I say no? When can I say you're wrong?
Right.
When can I disagree
Yep.
with somebody who is a stand-in for God?
Right. Well, it's
Um,
yeah, and I think and there's also that yeah, I was a religious studies major
mm,
and did some work around just women trauma and spirituality, and it's like when that worldview is shattered, right?
mhm.
And most religions do touch on the idea of good and evil in
Sure.
some way, but
Mhm.
it's like, how do you pull that from such a high level into your sort of most intimate spaces
Right.
and like what that really looks like if somebody can be good and bad at the same time.
Mhm.
Like the world is like that, but people can be like that too.
Right, right. And to recognize that people in those positions of authority, um, are themselves people and often have their own traumas and their own problems that they're bringing into the
Yes.
conversation, and so they're not infallible.
Right.
um, and acknowledging that and remembering that. I think a lot of like I mentioned, being closeted in high school, when the first time I came out to anyone was to a priest in a confessional scenario. And I mentioned gender queerness and sexuality queerness, and was told to bury it. That was his direct words were, "Bury it. If you want to live a holy life, you need to bury that." And so later in life, finding that that particular priest left the church, is now an out and proud gay man,
Wow.
is like acknowledging that that's a person who had his own, that's probably what he was told, and he went into the priesthood as a way to try and wrestle with this identity and faith at the same time, and found that that didn't work. And so that is the background that he brought to the conversation. Um, I think that that's such an important piece to remember. It's the same idea as like when kids finally realize that their parents are
Are
people.
people, right. I mean, and you think about that when you are I think about it's like, how do you create an environment where, you're talking about in gay and lesbian communities where there are people and mentors that you can find that have sort of had that story, or if I think about PTSD in veterans communities, and there's a sort of identified community of people that have had that same experience from you, and you can find people who have found a way to heal in
Right.
some way. And in the sexual violence community, there is not as much of that sense of community
Mm,
because there's so much still shame around it.
absolutely.
And I think also I've learned is that, just because we've experienced the same type of trauma doesn't mean that we're the right people to be partners in a healing
Right,
journey either.
right.
It's like I might want to go to the gym all the time and you might want to do art all the time. And like, so it's sort of like whatever that kind of survivor experience looks like for people, or how do we want to show up? So it's like, how do you create environments that allow people
Mhm.
to connect with each other? Which I think is something also would be an interesting place to
Right.
think about for high school
Yes, yeah,
communities and
and I think about this with, like, support group type stuff,
right.
right? Of, like, when you there is a sort of care you need to take to make sure that when you do bond with someone, right, and you find you have a shared experience, finding ways to make that experience supportive and
Mhm.
growth instead of compounding, and, right,
Right.
like, that's a
Right.
huge difficulty,
Yes.
and it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't always work,
Right.
but when you do find that person that can lift you up, that you
Right.
can lift them up.
Right.
It's such a beautiful thing.
Yes. No, I mean, I think back to my, like, survivor girl gang
Yeah,
in
right?
in high school, like, how we would have benefited, right? I mean, I think in the corporate world, it'd be like an executive sponsor, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like, how do you find those executive sponsors that have, lived through something, or even just on the
mhm,
the topic of becoming a better bystander,
right,
or somebody who could be an executive sponsor to that trusted adult who could have sat you down as a 14-year-old to say, "Hey, this is like what's happening." It's kind of like, how do we lift each other up in these conversations and
right,
sort of find ways to support each other and also like make them fun sometimes, it's like
mhm,
parenting is hard, but we find a way to joke about it.
yeah,
So
yeah. You mentioned the idea of being a better bystander,
Mhm.
and I think about that a lot, because I think, we've seen particularly through things like the Me Too movement and things like that, where, something is brought to light and somebody does speak up, and then the organization they're working with excuses it, makes excuses, doesn't deal with the issue. How do you then continue to be a good bystander and stand up and say, no, you need to address this?
right. Right.
And I think that's where it becomes hard. The initial stand up can sometimes be the sort of it's still not easy, but it is easier than standing up, being denied, and
Well,
continuing to stand
right,
up.
but I think it's like you have to, I mean, I think in workplace organizations, you have to operationalize
Mhm.
a cultural change, which I think, again, in the best case scenario, you can have a human resources department or a people team
Mm,
that's really helping to drive and support that. But it's not leading it. It
right.
is facilitating it because it's all of us,
Yes.
and it's finding strategies to engage more people. And so it's the difference between being on my own journey and helping to teach other
Right.
people how to bring people on that journey as
Bring
well.
everyone needs to be in the
Right. And
conversation.
so, and I think it's, for better or worse, it's like carving out the time, making it a priority, doing something that you're not good at, is like
Right.
these are all just sort of human things that people don't like to get in the way of. So maybe we can wrap up a little bit, since some heavy topics
Mm.
about high school and workplace is, you are a part of the gaming community.
Yes.
And so I have always been inspired and curious about, how might you bring conversations like this that would prevent and respond to sexual violence into the gaming community. And so let's tell me
Um,
something I don't know.
so this is an interesting thing. So when I talk about the gaming community, I'm very
What does
particular.
that even
Right.
mean?
I am a member of the board gaming community
Board
specifically.
games. Okay.
I work with an independent board game company called Offcut Games, run
Okay.
by one of my best friends, Pat Brennan. We have a few published games, and we particularly our whole thing is we sell just enough games to be able to fund ourselves to go to like the big PAX conventions that are centered around video gaming and board gaming, and our big one is in Philly, the PAX Unplugged, which is centered entirely on board gaming. And there is this really large community of small indie board game designers that are just interested in the mechanics of gaming and the art
Yeah.
of gaming, and
People
creating.
like games.
People like
So
games.
tell me with your gaming hat on,
Mhm.
how would I turn the uncomfortable conversation into a game?
Ooh, I think the easiest way is to go into some sort of trivia type thing, and create, uh
Could it be like a Cards Against
it
Humanity, but
could be.
it's
Oh, that would be an interesting to
yeah,
have, like, a topic and a question card that
right,
get, pulled
pulled together
together. Yeah, that would be interesting, or
or like a trivia. I'm not sure what the trivia.
yeah. I think of game of both, like, a Cards Against Humanity type thing, but there's one that's called, like, Red Flags,
Okay.
that is a dating-based game where you sort of pick an archetype person, and then your opponents have red cards that have, like, negative,
Oh,
personality traits or
okay.
behaviors that they can put on that, and you have to decide whether or not this is still somebody you would go on a date with.
Interesting.
Um
Like, what if it was like a team game and the
mm,
goal was to create a safe and healthy environment with the
yes.
team, and
Yeah.
so then you had to, like, do the uncomfortable conversation
Mhm.
on consent, or you had to sit someone down and tell them that sexual violence
That would
happened in
be
their
interesting.
community.
Yeah, a game where you're trying to create a safe environment, and yet there are these sort of, like, challenge pieces
Yes.
that come in of, like, this scenario
Oh,
pops up,
uh-oh,
this
you found out
person
your
walks in.
favorite teacher is
Yes,
actually a pedophile.
right! Like, that would certainly spur
Right.
some uncomfortable
Yes,
conversation. What do you
exactly.
do?
What are you gonna do? Are you
Uh,
gonna sit down and talk to the survivor? Are you going to start a training
mhm.
program to
So it becomes a role-playing
Yeah, it would be a
yeah,
role-playing game.
yeah,
That could be fun.
yeah, that would
Okay, I like this as an idea. Okay, you've got my wheels
yeah.
turning.
But
So
I think, in the board gaming industry is similar to many others where it is a community of it's really like small communities, small businesses coming together in a larger
Mhm.
community. And you do hear stories from other companies, other organizations where there is some sort of abuse situation that occurs. And I have found, in my experience at least, when that is found out by the larger community, the gut reaction is often to ostracize that entire company.
Hmm.
We don't work with them anymore. We shield them off. They stop appearing at
Mhm.
conventions, and then they're just gone.
Hmm.
Um,
Where do they go? Do they go to the island of
they go to the
terrible
island
people
with terrible people, I guess. They go to, the pile
and
of failed businesses.
and
They go
start
to
right.
yeah.
It's really interesting. It is interesting because I mean, I think it's, again, kind of going back to it's like what's the world that we want to create? Is
Mhm.
like we want to create a world where people take accountability, but hopefully grow and
Right.
come back and join the community in a safer and healthier way once they've sort of done the work
Mhm.
to be a more healed, safer person. And it's like that's not always possible
Right.
because it's, good and evil has existed for as long as we've documented history. And so sometimes that's not possible, but if that's really kind of
Yeah.
what we're dreaming of, that would
The
be
flip side of this, when you have bigger companies that have really well-known games, and then you learn about something that's happened, and within the community, there is this swell of, "Well, we don't work with them anymore," but they're still present. They're too big
Mhm.
to just fall away, and it becomes this rumor within the industry that isn't always public, that isn't known to the consumer, isn't known to the people buying and playing the game. I think one of the good examples we've already talked about is Cards Against Humanity.
Mhm.
There was a situation where the owners of that were very supportive of the first Trump administration, I believe, and I may be misquoting a little bit here, but they were very supportive of like the border wall and the detention of children immigrants, and so within the community there was this like, oh no, here's this game we all loved, we were all a big part of, we all enjoyed playing, and now we're all trying to find alternatives. We're all trying to create our own different versions of it, and none can compete with the behemoth that is Cards Against
Yeah.
Humanity.
I'm curious sort of in that situation that you're describing, and then were those reactions from people who knew the founders personally and had understood where they were coming from and their points of view? And
I won't necessarily say understood where they were coming from and their points of view, but those perspectives of, like, the industry ostracization were from people that knew these creators directly,
mm,
that had worked with these
right.
creators, had maybe partnered with them on other
Yep.
games, that will no longer
Right.
do so.
It sounds very similar to me of sort of some of the dynamics in college campuses where, if somebody commits a sexual assault on a college campus and that, they are going to be held accountable
Mhm.
for that sexual assault and they can no longer go to that school but they should get a college education.
Right.
They should have friends and they should have friends and people that love them. They should have a community of people that
Yeah.
can surround them. And so I think I think we have to some extent created a world where it can be very hard to disagree with each other
Mm.
and to still love each other.
Yes.
And so what does that really look like in the context of people who've experienced sexual violence already know? I mean,
Mhm.
from speaking for myself personally, people you love can hurt you in deep
Yes.
ways. And I think that for me at least, the ideal of redemption in that
Mm.
is to be able to create a space where we can live in a little bit more
Yes.
in between. And so, because I do not want to ostracize any part of myself.
Right.
And so anyway, but I think that might be a great place for us this to end
Wonderful.
some good food for thought. But Edie, really appreciate you being here today and diving into all of these different areas and experiences, and wish you the very best in all of your uncomfortable
Thank you. Thank you.
conversations
It's my
and all of
pleasure.
the context. And thank you for joining us. And hopefully there's a little nugget that you picked up on that you can take into the world in an uncomfortable way. And if there's something that you liked today, please also like us on Instagram and YouTube. So thank you for joining us today.